What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, it is my review of Resident Evil Requiem. My first review of 2026. We are finally here, starting off the year with a big review, the most recent game in the Resident Evil franchise. This came out on February 27th, 2026, and I've had it finished for about a month. I'd say a couple days after the game came out, I finished my first playthrough. And then about a week ago, as of recording this video, I started my second playthrough, and I haven't quite made my way through it yet, but I'm very close to finishing it for a second time. So I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things to say on Resident Evil Requiem. I'm very excited to get into those thoughts. And without further ado, let's dive in. Before we dive in and talk strictly Resident Evil Requiem, I want to give you my background on my experience with the franchise so you know where I'm coming from with my thoughts. I have played through Resident Evil 2 Remake, 3 Remake, 4 Remake, 7, and 8. All pretty recently. I'd say the first one I finished was 4 Remake back when it came out in 2023. That was my first experience with Resident Evil. And then I think in 24 I played 2 and 3 Remake. And then most recently, and videos are up on the channel for both of these games, I finished Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8. So all those games are the ones that I have finished. I feel like those are the ones that were necessary to play to the lead up for Resident Evil Requiem, because as we'll talk about with the gameplay, this takes both first person and third person perspectives. So you see the first person in Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, and then the third person in 2, 3, and 4. So that kind of all culminated into what we got with Requiem. I've loved my experience with the franchise. Being a sort of newcomer now to the franchise, I've played through a lot of them now, so I'm not super new, but really enjoyed 2 Remake. 3 Remake, I was kind of 50-50 on, good parts about it, but definitely my least favorite out of the ones I've played. 4 Remake is definitely at the top of the list. Loved my experience with that. And then going through last year and playing Resident Evil 7 for the first time. Really enjoyed the way that they switched up the perspective to first person, but we're still able to keep that great Capcom game design, but also make it really scary and really terrifying at some moments. And then Resident Evil 8, kind of taking what 7 did so well, and then taking 4 and what made the gameplay in 4 so good, and kind of combining them into what was a video game that was a lot of fun. So Resident Evil, the games that I have played, I can definitely see why there's so much hype around this franchise. And going into Requiem, I was super excited to see them basically just take the best of both worlds, all the lessons they've learned from first person, from third person, what to do and what not to do, and they've culminated it all into this brand new game. So I was super excited going into it, and now let's finally dive in to my thoughts on Resident Evil Requiem. Now, like always, we'll talk about gameplay first, and this is going to be a very interesting review to talk about gameplay for, because not from a story spoiler perspective, but from gameplay and how the game is structured. It's structured in a way where I don't want to spoil how the game progresses as you go through it, but you do switch between two different characters. Grace being the survival horror character, more like Resident Evil 7. You're supposed to play in first person, and it is a lot more tense and scary, limited resources, especially with the first kind of more open part that you play as Grace. You are going to be struggling for resources, making every shot count. Every missed shot is going to hurt really, really bad. You have a very limited inventory that you can increase as you collect items, but that inventory, you're going to have to manage it. You're going to have to get rid of some stuff, make some tough choices, which is what makes Resident Evil 7 did a really good job with that. Makes that choice and strategy super difficult, but super fun to engage with. And then you have the supply boxes like you would in most games as well, where you can store stuff that if you don't want to hold on to them at that moment, you need space, you can store them and use them later. But the gameplay for Grace is just Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8's gameplay, but just fine-tuned and made a lot of fun. And even different, I don't think in 7 and 8 you were able to, like, when you aim down sights, you don't aim down the sights exactly, but you do hold it like right in front of you, as opposed to just kind of slightly aiming in like you would in 7 and 8. So that was a pretty cool kind of change to how that looks and feels. But then it's a lot of what you expect from those games in the first person perspective. There's a lot of puzzles to solve. There is a lot of Metroidvania style, I can't get to this door now, but eventually something will happen in the story, or I will be able to unlock or find something that I can circle back to that location and then be able to go through that door, go to that area. They do a really good job of putting you in tense situations. I mean, the enemy design is gross in a good way. And one thing that I feel like a lot of people have noticed that is a really cool feature is that the enemies, the zombies that you fight, have almost their own personalities, where you'll find a worker in the hotel or the asylum that you're in, and he's flipping on and off the lights, and you'll see the maid in the bathroom wiping the mirrors down. The chef in the kitchen is chopping up meat as you walk in. A lot of really cool, just minor details that make you feel more immersed in the world. Really cool there. Just overall, the gameplay for Grace is a lot of fun. It's what made 7 so good, and it's just fine-tuned and made a lot better. What is really interesting is my second playthrough. The first playthrough I did was on just the standard modern difficulty, and then I did my second playthrough on the classic difficulty, which switches up Grace in a cool way that I feel like is old school. Maybe it is. I haven't played those old school Resident Evil games, so maybe this, I don't know if the ink ribbons have anything to do with the older games, but instead of just being able to save at the typewriters whenever you want, you have to find ink ribbons which you can use to save. You have to have these ink ribbons to be able to save. You don't have as many auto saves with Grace when you're playing on classic as you would on the modern difficulty. So it does kind of switch things up when you're playing as Grace, and I didn't have any issues really when I was playing through as Grace finding these ink ribbons. I was able to find them, decently enough to not have to worry about not being able to save. But it is a cool, different twist on things to have to find a certain item to be able to save. So that was a cool little detail and twist on the formula playing as Grace. Playing as Grace, since it is more of a survival horror focused approach to it, not as much action, so you will be sneaking around a lot, trying to find the best cover to hide from enemies. There is a almost Mr. X style enemy that you will see, where you have to try and avoid them at all costs through multiple sections when playing as Grace. And kind of to segue into the Leon part of the game, I think what the game does very well is switches perspectives and doesn't make it feel very drawn out for each character. Each character does have their own longer section of the game, which is a lot of fun, but in between those and before and after those, it does a great job of, here's a quick Grace segment, and then here's a quick Leon segment. So it does feel super balanced throughout its runtime, which is something that is done very, very well. Like I said, you're supposed to play as Grace in first person and Leon in third, but you do have the option to, if you want to, play first person throughout the entire game, or third person the entire game, or do Grace in third and Leon in first. It gives you that option. I didn't mess with that. I just went straight up Grace first person, Leon third person, and I never swapped the perspectives. But I did think it was interesting, and I still might go back and try this out just to see how it is to play as Leon in first person. I wonder how cool that would be. It would pretty much probably just be like Resident Evil 8 all over again, but I don't have a problem with that. That would be pretty cool. So it is very nice to see them give you options with the perspectives and not just lock you to first and third. If you want that third person all the way through experience, you can have that. First person all the way through, you can have that. So the Grace part of the game, really fun, very enjoyable. Resident Evil 7, but fine-tuned is the way that I like to think about it. Now to switch over to Leon, who is the more action-focused character that you'll play as, very akin to Resident Evil 4, which, like I said in the background part, I loved the Resident Evil 4 remake, so I was super excited to see what they were going to be able to do. We really haven't gotten a Leon third-person action-focused. I've heard 6 is a lot like that, but I haven't played 6, and 6 also has kind of mixed reviews, so I just like to think of it a lot like Resident Evil 4, so I was very excited to go in and play as Leon, and it did not disappoint. Again, just like with Grace, it feels like Leon's part of the game is Resident Evil 4 but fine-tuned. So it's very, very good. Action-focused, you have a lot of inventory space as opposed to Grace, who doesn't have a lot of inventory space. A lot more weapons, you're going to find a lot more ammo, a lot more enemies are going to be on the screen at the same time. And Leon feels so good to control. You can do melee attacks, 2 or 3 shots to the head of a normal zombie is going to stun them, and you can go into a roundhouse kick or do some other kind of melee attack to get them down to the ground. He also has a hatchet, which they kind of brought back from Resident Evil 4 remake with the knife system, which I'm pretty sure was something that they introduced that was brand new to the remake that wasn't in the original Resident Evil 4, where you can do parries. There's a parry system in Resident Evil 4, which is brought back into Requiem. Very, very cool. It is almost kind of upgraded in most ways, where if you have the durability for it, you can do takedowns on enemies that you stun, or if they're on the ground after you do a melee attack on them, you can finish them there or sneak up on someone to do the melee attack. So that hatchet system being brought in is very, very cool. And then once you're in the Leon part of the game that really opens up, there's a whole other type of progression system where you have this tracker where when you get kills, you get points that you're going to be able to spend on upgrades for your weapons, and this really opens up the game. It almost feels like an entirely different game that you're playing as Leon, where you have upgrades to weapons that you can upgrade 2 or 3 times for each part and buy new weapons, and you find these tracker modules that you can sell and get a lot of points for. You can sell old weapons that you don't want to use anymore. So that really opens up the game in a big way. And I really enjoyed Leon's longer section. Probably my favorite part of the game. I just really enjoyed being able to explore and find hidden things off to the side that are off the beaten path, and just find more gameplay moments that I was really enjoying how they were doing it. It didn't feel like it was overblown in any way with his open part, but it just felt contained enough to be able to just have a lot of fun with it. I really enjoyed his part of the game, his parts of the game. It just feels so good. The game feels so good to control, from every weapon feeling great to being able to mix and match weapons, find what your loadout is, because you're able to kind of quick select weapons. So instead of having to go into your inventory and select a weapon to use, you can find the 4, 5, or 6 weapons that fit your playstyle the most, and then use those and swap to them very quickly. Awesome, just awesome game design there. It just feels so good to be able to play as Leon in third person, and the action is ramped up. There's a lot of very cool sections just that are, preset moments in the game, but still are really cool sections. Boss fights, you'll come across a couple boss fights with Leon that are really, really cool. So Leon's gameplay, my favorite part of the game, just because I am such a big fan of Resident Evil 4 and that action third person focused with still some scary moments. There's still going to be some scary moments and some gross moments throughout your playtime as Leon, even in the more linear parts that you play as him, but also the open parts as well. A lot of fun. The gameplay in Resident Evil Requiem is just a ton of fun. One thing I did not touch on that I will very, very quickly before I forget, as Grace, going back to Grace, you do have a sort of progression system where you'll unlock this piece of equipment that allows you to collect blood and you can find these, I don't remember the exact name of them. You'll find something on the ground or just something that you can take to this piece of science equipment and kind of scan it and analyze it, and it takes you into this kind of weird puzzle thing with atoms where you have to solve that to be able to craft new equipment. Probably didn't do a very good job of explaining that, but if you've played the game, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But that kind of added a solid bit of progression to Grace, having to find blood to be able to craft items. You need blood and scrap to be able to craft pistol ammo, and kind of strategizing, okay, I'm going to collect this blood, what am I going to use this for? Am I going to create the pistol ammo, or am I going to create something to heal with? That was a cool bit of progression there as well. So both Leon and Grace have their own sort of progression in their more open parts of the game that you can have a lot of fun with. So the gameplay as a whole, to wrap it up because there's a lot to talk about, is a lot of fun. First person, third person, fine-tuned and combined into a fantastic gameplay experience. I had a lot of fun in Resident Evil Requiem. Now to very quickly talk about the visuals and performance, which in Resident Evil Requiem are fantastic. I don't know how they're able to do it. All the Resident Evil games that I've played, Capcom has somehow been able to make them super well optimized, and Requiem is no different. This game runs super smooth. I think there was maybe one section in the game, but it was very, very brief, where I experienced any sort of frame drops, but the rest of the experience, smooth. Very, very smooth. The game runs great. I don't know how it is on console. I did play it on PC, and I don't remember exactly what frames I was getting or the kind of range, but it was probably somewhere 120 plus, which is the experience that I've gotten with games like 7 and 8 as well on PC. So the performance, I don't know how they do it, but they're able to have these games be well optimized at launch. That's always great. Visuals, this game is gorgeous. I mean, the character designs are fantastic. Each character looks great. The enemy designs are great. The different locations that you'll go to, not to spoil anything. Like I said, it's very tricky to talk about locations, and it's hard to talk about locations without getting into spoilers for not only story but gameplay. Even if you've seen the trailers, you kind of know where the game is going, but I'm not going to talk about that. But it just does a fantastic job of making each location feel unique, which is what Resident Evil does very well. Very memorable gameplay sequences and parts of the game where you're like, oh, do you remember that part of the game? Or, you know, do you remember Leon's open part of the game? Usually these sections have their own names to them. Very, very well done. Visuals and the performance go hand in hand in this game. It looks like a 2026 game. That is the best way to put it, is that it looks just so good. Like at the beginning of the game when you're playing as Grace for the first time and you're walking through the city and it's pouring down rain, and then you make your way into this building, and the way that the game builds up atmosphere, which I didn't really include in this part of the video, and I usually do include it in the visuals and performance part with my Resident Evil videos, is atmosphere. This game still does a fantastic job with atmosphere, and especially in the Grace parts of the game where it's supposed to feel creepy, intense, and that first person perspective adds on to that. It is able to build up that tension. You know, the sound design is helping along the way. Everything is going hand in hand in Resident Evil Requiem, and somehow they were able to just nail everything when it comes to the visuals and the atmosphere and the performance. No complaints here at all on that front. Looks stunning, plays very well, runs very well, and atmosphere is kicking it at all times. So all of these parts of the game are fantastic. And now finally to talk about story. Story in Resident Evil, for me in the games that I played, has been very interesting because I think with games like 2 and 4, they have great stories. They do have enjoyable stories, but nothing out of the park. Nothing that is, you know, fantastic. You know, great characters. The stories are always good to great. With Resident Evil 3, I don't really remember that story a whole lot, so couldn't really say anything about that. That one I guess maybe isn't super memorable. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that. It's been a minute since I played it. With 7 and 8, 7 had a good to maybe great story, I'd say, and then 8's story was just fine. It was probably the weakest that I can think of. Maybe 3's right there with it, at least the 3 remake. But there's never been that like really, really good story. And I think Resident Evil Requiem, to me, has probably my favorite story in Resident Evil game that I've experienced. So to give you a quick plot premise, again, no spoilers in this video. 28 years after the destruction of Raccoon City that we saw in Resident Evil 2, you will play as Grace Ashcroft, who is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft from Resident Evil Outbreak. I've never played that game, but she is, it's not like a complete, I mean, it's a complete brand new character, but the daughter of someone that we have seen before in the franchise. You'll play as her, and you'll also play as Leon Kennedy, who returns for the first time since Resident Evil 6. So big to have him back, and I feel like everyone loves Leon. He's just a great character. Voice acting is phenomenal for him. We'll talk more about voice acting in just a little bit. But Grace is instructed to investigate deaths of Raccoon City survivors. The incident that happened, survivors from that have been dying. They have been found dead, and she is instructed to find out what is going on with that, and she has to go back to the place where her mother was murdered. And it kind of, you know, rubs her the wrong way. She doesn't want to do it, but she has to, and that's the first part of this game where you'll meet the main villain. I'd say there's 2 main villains, but I feel like Gideon is the main villain that we've kind of seen in trailers. I think Gideon he's a good villain. I think Resident Evil, what I will say from what I have played, is that their villains have always been super strong parts of the game. With Resident Evil 4, going back and think about that, but then 7 and 8 more recently for me with the Baker family, and then you had the 4 wards, I guess, from Resident Evil Village. Their villains have always been great, and Gideon is another great villain who looks just crazy from a visual perspective. I love the way that he is designed. His voice actor, again, is great, and he is just a super threatening villain. He's got that kind of feel and vibe to him that you wouldn't want to mess with him. Great villain. So Grace goes to the hotel to figure out what's going on with the murders of these Raccoon City survivors, and then Leon is thrusted into that as well, and then it all kind of culminates together. That's kind of the plot premise of this. That's how the plot is set up, and the ways and where the plot goes, where the story goes, I thought was a lot of fun and a lot of really cool moments and a lot of throwbacks, especially with the Leon parts of the games. This game has a lot of throwbacks and is a love letter to those older Resident Evil games. A lot of throwbacks to Resident Evil 2, and you kind of know why if you've watched trailers. You do end up going back to Raccoon City. So there's a lot of throwbacks to things that you've experienced before. If you've played through the games, if you played through 2, especially 4, if you're playing through and this is your first Resident Evil game, you won't get those throwbacks, but it does make that experience going through the story, if you are someone that has played through these games, a lot more enjoyable with the throwbacks. And I think Leon in this game, I feel like he has a lot more of a character, maybe. This might be a hot take, I don't know, than he did in 2 and 4. Obviously in 2, he's this rookie cop. He's kind of just trying to get his footing. 4, he's a great character. He's got a lot of great one-liners, which you do get in Resident Evil Requiem as well. But there's a lot of really cool things that they do with his character in this game that just amp up his character as the story goes on. And then I think Grace is also a great protagonist. I've seen a little bit of maybe mixed. I don't know. Maybe people like her more than they don't like her. But I think mostly where the complaints come from is the way that she approaches the things that happen in this game. Very, very timid, very afraid, but you would be if you were in the situations that she is in this game, which are a lot of messed up situations. It's different, I think, than it was for Ethan Winters in 7 and 8, who I wasn't a big fan of. I like Grace a whole lot more. You know, every time she talks, I feel like a complaint I've seen is she always has that kind of stutter pretty much every time that she goes to talk. But, I mean, that is the kind of emotions that she is facing while going through these situations. She is terrified, and, you know, when adrenaline kicks in, you don't know how to find the words, and stutters come out. So I feel like it just makes her character a lot more relatable, and just makes you realize that Grace is really struggling with the things that she is seeing and doing in this game. I really liked Grace as a character. Would not be opposed at all if she came back in a future game. So another great protagonist that I think hopefully we'll see return in future games. I think the story in this game, like I said, is my favorite. A lot of cool twists near the end of it. There are 2 different endings. I will say that. I think that's kind of been something that we have seen floating around. And the way this game ends, very, very good. I think that the ending, the way that it is approached, and it makes you basically, have you been paying attention to the story when you get to that ending? This game runs, I think my final play time, the in-game counter I think said maybe 8 or 9 hours. So again, pretty standard for Resident Evil game, and going back through it, you could definitely speed run. There's been a lot of speed runs out there that have gone through the game very, very quickly. That's the whole point, I feel like, of going through and doing second and third playthroughs, is to memorize the game, remember what happens and where, and find the best strategies to be able to get through it as quickly as possible. My in-game, or my Steam counter, I think set a little bit higher, so I think I'd probably more trust the in-game counter with, you know, it probably doesn't count when you're in pause menus. I'm not entirely sure how the in-game counter goes, but as of recording this video, Steam says I have about 20 hours in the game. That's after going through a first playthrough and then starting a second playthrough, which, doing a second playthrough for me was a lot more gameplay focused, because I wasn't really paying attention as much to the story because I'd already experienced that. This was the first time I've actually replayed a Resident Evil game. I'm not big on replaying games really at all. Once I play through it for the first time, I'm usually moving on to the next thing. But I know Resident Evil games are big on replayability, and after the main story, you complete challenges and achievements, and you get these challenge points, which you can spend on things like new weapons or infinite ammo cheats, and, you know, looking at art and models, all that stuff. So it makes doing second and third playthroughs worth it, because there's challenges to go and complete as you are working through the game once again. Resident Evil always does a very good job with that, and I could definitely see that when going through and doing my second playthrough, why these games are well known for their second and third playthroughs, and even past that, and people were able to put hundreds of hours into these games. So the story, for me, to not getting into any spoilers, is my favorite that I have played so far out of the Resident Evil games. I really enjoyed it. All the throwbacks, the new characters that you're introduced to as well, just a lot of fun. I really did enjoy the Resident Evil Requiem story, and I think it is just the cherry on top of what is just a fantastic experience all the way through. I really enjoyed my time with Resident Evil Requiem. Before we move on from story, I have a couple clips I want to show. I show a couple different things, like cutscenes that show how creepy the game really is and make your skin crawl. And then also, this game has really, really good voice acting. I know I kind of mentioned that. The voice acting is fantastic from everyone who's involved. Grace, Leon, Gideon, all the other characters as well. And then just Leon being Leon. He's got a bunch of one-liners in this game, but he's just such a cool character. So I have a couple clips to show these things off.
Grace! Grace!
I just don't give up. Take her. Get her safe. Go. Now.
And now we have my verdict for Resident Evil Requiem. I am changing the way that I'm doing the verdicts for these reviews, because with last year and how I did those reviews, I basically based my verdict on price. So if a game like Hades 2, which was my game of the year, $30, 100% recommended that game. Something like Ghost of Yotei was $70, double the price. Still really enjoyed that game. I recommended that game as well. But I feel like I want there to be a more kind of condensed and refined way to explain how I feel about a game without focusing so much on price. So I don't want to do numbers, a review scale that's based on numbers. I don't like doing that. So what I've done is I've just taken 6 adjectives, and I'm going to be going based on these 6 words to describe as a whole, condensed into one word, how do I feel about this game. So this scale goes from bottom to top: bad, okay, good, great, amazing, and then masterpiece. Those are the 6 words. So I feel like it's not too many words, and it kind of conveys how I feel about it, all condensed into one word. Now, when getting back to Resident Evil Requiem, throughout this entire video I've pretty much talked about how good this game is. The gameplay from both Leon and Grace's perspectives are fantastic. It just feels like more fine-tuned versions of what we've seen in the franchise before. Visuals and performance and atmosphere are out of the park. It performs great, it looks great, and it does a great job of creating a very tense atmosphere. And then story being my favorite in the franchise, callbacks to older Resident Evil games that make you glad that you are a fan of the franchise, but then just really cool twists and turns, great characters, great voice acting along the way. So with my first review of 2026 with Resident Evil Requiem and the first review on this new rating scale, I'm going to call Resident Evil Requiem a masterpiece. Now, is this game perfect? No game is perfect. You could always go and nitpick certain things with every game. My favorite games of all time, I could go and nitpick things about each one of them. So a masterpiece doesn't mean this game is perfect. And I don't want masterpiece to be something that is thrown around a lot, but I also don't want it to be something that is just exclusive to only a couple of games. If I really feel that strongly about a game, amazing doesn't feel like it is enough for Resident Evil Requiem and how I feel about it. So I'm going to call this game a masterpiece. I think this game does everything that it sets out to do so well. Gameplay, visuals, story, everything I just talked about. It's all condensed into this it's such a good package. It is such a good package. Everything you would want in a Resident Evil game, they have delivered on it. Is it my favorite in the franchise? I'd probably still give that to 4. I just loved 4 so much. I really enjoyed that. But I'd probably put it right behind 4. That's probably where I'd put it in terms of rankings very quick. I'd go 4 remake, Requiem, 2 remake, and then 7, 8, 3 remake. That is how I would put Requiem and stack it up against the rest of the games in the franchise. All things considered, everything combined together, this game I would call a masterpiece on the brand new ratings scale, and I would absolutely recommend it. Even if you're not a Resident Evil fan, even with the story having callbacks to older Resident Evil games, I would still, if you were interested, I would play through 2 and 4 for sure, just because it gives the background and the most background on the story. But then I would also play through 7 and 8 just to get that first person perspective and gameplay that you see there. But if you're going into Requiem looking to play it, I would go 2 and 4 for sure. But you could still jump in and play Requiem without having played any of the other ones as well. I think this is a great introduction to newcomers also. So that is going to do it for the video. Thank you guys for watching, hanging out, talking about Resident Evil Requiem. Let me know your thoughts about it down in the comments. Do you love it? Do you hate it? What would your review of the game be? We're a month out from the release of it, so the hype is kind of gone down from it since it is a single player game, but reviews are still overwhelmingly positive pretty much across the board for this game, and I can see why. It is such a good game, and I cannot wait to see how it's going to stack up with the rest of the games that we're expecting this year. I also cannot wait to see what are we going to get from Resident Evil down the line in the future. Resident Evil 10, who knows when that's going to come out, what other kind of remakes we're going to get. I am just super excited for all things Resident Evil that are coming in the future. And if you guys want to see me play other Resident Evil games, 5 and 6 being big ones that I feel like a lot of people might want to see, or maybe even going back and playing the original game, or Resident Evil 0, or all the other side games, let me know down in the comments which ones should I play, which ones are worth it to play. So that is going to do it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more, and I'll talk to you later.